Welcome to Making an Impact. I'm Katie Mills, Head of Zygo Power at Schneider Electric. And in this podcast, we meet incredible individuals from a range of industries to discuss the exciting projects they're involved with today, their career journey today, and ultimately what impact their work is having on the world. In this episode, we're making an impact with Raffael Jovine, founder and chief scientist of Brilliant Planet, who advocates for carbon removal to ensure environmental security for the future. Global warming is a problem that each and every one of us are aware of, and Brilliant Planet are one of the organisations who are dedicated to removing carbon dioxide from the Earth's atmosphere with a unique combination: algae and the desert. So welcome, Raffael, to Making an Impact. So starting off with the basics, who are Brilliant Planet and what do they do?
Brilliant Planet is a UK-based research and development company that has developed a new way of growing marine microalgae, the organisms that bloom in the ocean naturally, on land year-round for the purpose of removing very large sums, many tons of atmospheric CO2. So it's a carbon removal scheme using natural resources like empty desert land, seawater, and lots of sunlight that is available in the deserts with renewable energies to restore the local environment.
Okay, and when you think of, I suppose, when you say the word algae, the word that doesn't necessarily spring to mind is desert, right? How did you come up with the idea? Where did it come from?
So in nature, these natural algae, which are microscopic plants that live in the coastal waters around the planet, are episodic. They grow very well for a small period of time. So the idea was, if we could make those bloom conditions happen year-round, then it would allow us in our ponds on land, in a controlled environment, then it would allow us to get the benefits of that high productivity of these algal bloom systems in a engineered, constructed way on land, and be able to get the efficiency of that system for 365 days a year, as opposed to in nature where you get them for 2 to 3 weeks. Just to give you a sense, per unit area, per square meter, we're 50 times more productive than a forest. And so it's a very effective system by bringing these things on land. So that was the challenge.
Okay, and I remember, when we've had discussions in the past, you mentioned that this sprung from a kind of patent that you came up with quite a few years ago now. What made you take that leap, right, from kind of coming up with that patent through to then releasing, I suppose, the business idea and actually, jumping off with as an entrepreneur into the business world with this idea?
So in 2008, I wrote a patent called A Method of Carbon Sequestration. And the whole idea was it needed to be sustainable and it needed to be scalable. Those were the two big challenges. And at a cost that is sensible. So in nature, these blooms happen for free. And unlike biofuels, which ended up costing much more than people expected, the hope was that we could find a way of taking advantage of those natural systems and, like you say, make them commercially sensible. And so in 2008, there wasn't much of a carbon market. And what we did is sort of explore other ways of cultivating algae for other purposes. But the fact is in the meantime, I started a company in 2013, and we were ready in a sense and could anticipate that there would be a demand for these carbon offsets, and started transitioning into growing the algae at ever lower cost so that we could get into the range where it makes sense from a social context point of view, that people could afford these carbon credits and would be willing to buy them in the currently voluntary carbon market. My hope is that we can bring that cost down to the point where it becomes really easy for local communities around the world to accept this methodology.
So what I hear from what you're saying is timing has been very crucial for you as an organization, right?
Sure.
From people being ready. What do you think has really, I suppose, driven this market now? Why are organizations now ready to kind of make these changes versus when you started in kind of 2013? Apologies.
There have been various challenges along the way in terms of the credibility and the certification of these kinds of carbon credits. There have been misaligned projects which didn't necessarily deliver what they said they would. And there is quite healthy skepticism with a lot of new technologies. And what has changed and evolved since 2013 is that both there is a more awareness amongst the customers that they need to do this and that they can use these voluntary credits to sort of approach net zero, especially when you're talking about hard to abate industries like cement and steel and companies and organizations that have a lot of airplane emissions, things like that. But on the other hand, the certification and the sort of mechanisms of making sure that this is real and this is accountable and that you're actually going to be able to demonstrate that this is not some form of greenwashing had to come along as well and had to mature as well. And so we have the advantage by being on land that everything is measurable. The water coming into the system can be measured. The water in the ponds can be measured. The water going out back into the ocean, including the environmental impact of that water in the coastal ocean. And of course, the biomass itself, we own the biomass. It's physically in coastal cliffs in these rock faults that are super stable. We have buried this biomass for years so we can show the durability of it. It's not decaying at all. And we have all the controls and the opportunities, and that makes things just much more credible and accountable. And our monitoring, reporting, and verification protocol has allowed us to demonstrate that. And so it's a different proposition than sort of taking good intentions on faith. And that has been really important in terms of the market evolving while we are trying to figure out all the technology and all the sort of subtlety of how to work with natural organisms. What's very important is we work with local organisms that are isolated from that environment. We've worked in South Africa, in Oman, now in Morocco. And we've worked in these very different environments. Very cold in the wintertime in South Africa. It's spectacularly hot in the summertime in Oman. Morocco is somewhere in between. But there are local organisms that are perfectly adapted and acclimated to those environments.
So they're very much native organisms,
right?
right? So you're not bringing external organisms into different kind of areas and regions, very much natively
focused.
It's
a very important aspect of the system. So many biofuel systems failed because they were overwhelmed by those local organisms. So what we decided was let's work with those local organisms because they're the ones that are going to succeed in those environments.
Working with nature rather than against it.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And this is obviously, you said, very much still a voluntary carbon market. How have you seen regulation shift and change, and what kind of impact have you seen that have on industry and kind of businesses over the last 10 years, let's say?
So there are different ways of approaching this. In Europe, you have decarbonization expectations by the European governments and the European Council. And you have to decarbonize, and there are compliance markets that are very actively regulating emissions. In the US, there are incentives for building new technologies and sort of tax breaks and other ways of stimulating new technology to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And there are various other schemes around the world in Japan and other places. And the reason why I say that is the excess of CO2 in the atmosphere is so large that we cannot decarbonize fast enough to prevent quite catastrophic climate change. And there is simultaneously in the background harmonization of the UN IPCC protocols and the Kyoto Protocol to try to get governments to enable private sector companies to provide these services to governments and for governments to trade these carbon credits amongst each other. So while we are in the voluntary market, in parallel, the sort of national compliance market is also evolving. And in my opinion, eventually the two will merge. And so what we have been doing is we've been preparing not just to sort of certify our own existing voluntary carbon credits, but to do it in a way that would allow us to then take advantage of a country like Morocco, has potential for enormous carbon removal work, and being able to then sell that and or trade that with other countries to be able to create a much bigger impact, basically. And so I am excited about sort of the regulation side. The voluntary carbon market is quite costly. All that certification and all those activities, there are many players involved and many levels of organizations that have to be paid out of those carbon credits. So there's also a economic and commercial sense in having the regulation kind of merge to create a more unified framework for carbon removals, basically.
Okay, and when you talk about the kind of projects that you have worked on or you have live right now, what role do the local communities play in these projects?
Massive role. We work in remote desert environments that are very low in terms of economic opportunities. And us employing local community staff is really helpful in terms of persuading governments that this is a good idea. But it is also really helpful for us because they master these desert solutions. They know how to work in these difficult, salty, hot, windy, sandy environments. And the reason why I say that is they've been doing it for tens of thousands of years. They know their way around these problems. And we've, in turn, learned a lot from the local communities. We are very conscious of the need to involve those local communities. We have an environmental and social management system that tracks all interactions with sort of local, state, national level organizations, and sort of tries to make sure that we are, in the same way that we're accountable on the carbon credit side, accountable to the community, and that we respond to their needs. So, for example, in the communities that we work, often the first thing that people require once they get employment is actually dental care. And so being able to sort of track those interactions is very, very helpful as well.
So again, as you said, kind of working with nature, you're also working with the local people who have knowledge and understanding, and that knowledge transfer seems like it's a really important part of what you guys are doing as well, right?
100%. I've been a marine biologist for many, many years, and I am still surprised by how local the ocean is. Every bay has its own little ecosystem. And of course, the people know this and are much more sort of aware of the context. With all the modern tools and remote sensing and all the wonderful ways of doing site assessments for us, the local knowledge really helps a lot, actually.
And, this is a very innovative solution. And I'm hearing from you also, you were probably way ahead of the curve back in 2013, right? So there must have been some trial and error.
Oh, of course.
Can you give me some examples of, maybe some U-turns you've had to make or some pivots that you've had to make over the kind of last 10 years that you maybe weren't expecting, and kind of what impact that has then had on the business and how it's helped develop the business.
So when we started, the carbon markets were not very valuable, and we looked at animal feed and other uses for the algae. And that was really useful experience from a content point of view, but it was a much harder business to break into, actually, because there are all the appropriate food health regulations and all these kinds of things that we needed to consider that would have taken us longer to develop, ironically. So pivoting back to carbon credits ended up being one of those pivots. Another area that we really were excited about was how to scale, but actually learning those engineering lessons in terms of scaling at sort of inappropriate steps and coordinating all the parts of the system so that they work at the same scale was really important, and having those engineering experiences. And the last thing I would say is when we started this, it was very manual. And what we've discovered is that in these remote communities, you cannot have 1,000 people turning 1,000 valves sort of, at 2 a.m. So we ended up working very hard on automating the systems and bringing in the kind of, in your language, supervisory control and digital acquisition, the SCADA control, logic, and structuring these industrial responses so that they're responsive to the environment. And that's been actually a very useful thing to do, both from an economic point of view, but also from an efficiency point of view. We are now a much better company than when we started doing this all manually, basically.
And kind of speaking about collaboration and partnerships, what role has a collaboration like the one that you have with Schneider Electric played, and kind of what impact are you seeing that level of collaboration is having?
So there are a couple of levels to this answer. One is we use a lot of environmental data, sort of proprietary sensors that are quite unique in our ponds, and a lot of sort of meteorological data, for example. And having interoperable systems that are really open is really important. And that was a very big lesson learned. And in terms of the partnerships, what we are finding is that we are much more able to work with the suppliers of this technology and to be able to anticipate the scale-up needs and to anticipate the technical needs that we have in comparison to working with a local contractor. So it's been very, very useful for us to have these very high-level, more strategic alignment. And what has been, Schneider, for example, is very strong in Morocco and has a lot of experience in that space, and allows us also to sort of approach other industries that Schneider works with. So it's been a super useful collaboration. We're a small startup. We cannot do all these things for ourselves. So having a partner to do them with is really helpful.
And kind of in general terms, really, when we speak collaboration, everyone knows the extent of climate change and the huge mounting that we are facing. How do you see collaboration playing a critical role in overcoming the challenges that we're facing?
So the excess CO2 that we need to remove that is not being removed by decarbonization in sort of hard to abate sectors like cement, like steel, like airplanes, is about 10 billion tons. That's the scale of the oil, the cement, and the steel industry combined. And we have to build a massive new industry. So without collaboration, that becomes impossible, because we need to benefit from the existing infrastructure that's out there. So, for example, our seawater intake can come from harbors, it can come from thermal cooling, it can come from desalination, and people who are already moving a lot of seawater. That's one side. But on the other side, it's also, if we can improve their process, there's a much more economically efficient way of scaling up. And so for us, the collaboration is built in. We have to collaborate.
So collaboration for you equals scale to an extent,
Absolutely.
right? It is really much about creating scale and having the biggest impact that you can possibly have.
Exactly.
So coming to Brilliant Planet, as a customer, naturally I come for you from a kind of carbon perspective, but how are you seeing your solutions fit into the wider kind of ESG strategy, sustainability strategies of organizations?
So we don't just deliver carbon credits. We also restore the local seawater back to its pre-industrial state. When we started this, we didn't want to be, you can imagine it like a balloon at a kid's birthday party, that if you squeeze it on one end, it just creates another problem somewhere else. It had to be a truly sustainable solution. So what we wanted to do was to make sure that we don't have, for example, enormous energy demand or huge resource demand in terms of steel and concrete and those kinds of things. And so we spent a lot of time, for example, thinking about how to reduce the energy content of every process step that we have, or how to reduce the carbon content in the materials that we're using. Now, the reason why I say that is thinking about the sustainability was sort of built in from the beginning, but there's also the social sustainability in the sense that we are creating these high quality jobs. Half of our staff in Morocco is female. We provide a lot of training. So there's the environmental restoration side, there's the social component, and the community benefits from these activities. So we create a lot of indirect jobs that are in the supply and in the food and in the taxi services and everything surrounding Brilliant Planet. And so the reason why I say that is the environmental social management system was designed to be able to respond to sort of international IFC and International Finance Corporation type expectations. But what we've discovered is it's also very useful, not from a pure compliance point of view, but from communicating with the communities, but also communicating with the government to show that these benefits create high value carbon credits. And the high value here is it's truly additional, it's scalable, it's durable, but it's also has these co-benefits and these social benefits. And so for us, it was very important to sort of build that in from the beginning.
Do you think in the future we'll see, you said, high value carbon credits? Are you anticipating in the future we're going to see kind of different levels of quality when it comes to carbon credits? Is that how you kind of see the future a little bit?
Yes, I do. And I don't think that's a bad thing, actually. So even less durable carbon credits, the reality is most biochar carbon credits will be less than 100 years durable. But that is still a useful time frame to work with, and it still has a quantifiable impact. And so I do think that there is a more differentiated market, which will be useful. And I do expect there to be some very high quality carbon credits that are more expensive, but lower quality ones that are maybe not as durable or don't have quite the additionality that are at least helping during this transition period at minimum. And so I do think that is naturally going to happen. My wish is that the industry, we can improve existing industries so that the carbon credits are sort of built in and that we can actually improve their processes, for example, for desalination by managing their brine or by providing pre-filtration so that they then are willing to adopt these technologies in a sense without necessarily having to worry about the carbon credits.
I hear people say a lot, they truly don't believe we'll make huge strides in this area unless carbon taxes are brought in. right? What are your views on that out of interest?
So
I appreciate I'm asking you the difficult questions here,
yeah,
Raffael.
no kidding. But the solar panels, wind farms have been inordinately successful. And there are various incentives now to do these new technologies. But in the end, renewable energies are more affordable now than traditional old fossil fuel power generation. And so the reason why I say that is I do think that it's important to get this new industry started, and it is important to help with scale. But in the end, this has to be an economically sensible program, because no developing country farmer wants to pay hundreds of dollars extra for their fertilizer if it has to carry all these carbon credits. So I do think taxation or some kind of form of accounting for the carbon content is very important. But it has to be measured in a way that is socially acceptable. And so I do think carbon taxation can help a lot, but estimated social burden of a ton of carbon is approximately $1,000 per ton of CO2. That's a cost that most countries in the world cannot afford. So we have to find other ways of paying for that. I do think it'll help.
So I'm hearing we have to be sensitive and sensible when it comes to those things,
exactly.
Right? So let's look towards the future for Brilliant Planet. What does it look like? What are you hoping for over the next kind of 10 to 15 years for the organization?
So we are still a small company. We're now building a full-scale module of production that does everything in the way it's supposed to. In Morocco, in the environment where we've been working for the last 5 years. That's the immediate short-term future. And we're going to use those lessons learned in terms of the engineering and the sort of continuity of the production and the operational stability to then do more of the scale-up. And in 5 years' time, we hope to be at about 270 to 320,000 tons of carbon removal per year, per unit of production. And then we want to take that worldwide. In Morocco alone, there's huge expansion potential. And we can go to Chile, Peru, southern Ecuador, South Africa, Namibia, southern Angola, the Red Sea, the Arabian Sea, the Persian Gulf, Australia, Baja California. There are many, many places we can go, including the Mediterranean and in Europe as well. And so the idea is once we've sort of really demonstrated this at an impactful scale, including the sort of environmental restoration elements, where we restore sort of the local coastline to its pre-industrial state, that part then is going to license the technology to many, many locations. So we can scale up in parallel.
And I'm going to come to you now, Raffael. It's a question that we ask everyone who joins us on the podcast is, what impact do you want to leave on this planet, on society? And how do you envisage your future? What's next for you, other than obviously scaling this incredible technology and these amazing innovations? What's next for Raffael?
So the scale-up is important, and it needs to be nurtured and supported. So I'm excited about that. And I do want to continue that. But in terms of the impact, what I see is a lot of technologies that are being considered and developed today are unfamiliar and not well known, because we work in deserts with marine organisms in a new market. It's risky, and the risk perception is very high. And so at least microalgae have the ability to do many more things, additional things other than just removing CO2. And I want that technology to become much more familiar. That's one side of it. I want the idea that you can create social and commercial benefit while restoring the environment, not as a philanthropic project, but as a actual commercial proposition. I want that to become familiar and credible and well established. And then I do hope that we can sort of, in a sense, what I'm excited about personally for myself is create a little bit of an industrial strategy around these large farms. These farms are quite large. They move hundreds of thousands to millions of tons of seawater per day. That provides an opportunity for aquaculture and other people to co-locate with us. And I think that's also very exciting.
Awesome. Well, Raffael, thank you. It's been fascinating talking to you. I'm super excited to see what is next for Brilliant Planet and how our collaboration continues and hopefully, the great impact that it's going to have for the future. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and it's a real privilege. Much appreciated.
Meet Zygo Activate, your carbon reduction solution. From tracking to emission reduction, Zygo Activate provides valuable insights and connects you with a network of energy solution providers to turn your ambitions into action. Wherever you are on your decarbonisation journey, our easy-to-use software gives you the customised roadmap and connections you need to reach your sustainability targets. Search Zygo Activate and request your free demo today.